Salufalava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susanna Suisuki. Coming up.
This is a Billabong building, one of the Chinese stores in CTF that's collapsed. We've got the rescue team in there now, trying to get some people out.
A major earthquake strikes Vanuatu. Also, no flights from PNG's Mendi airport for the foreseeable future. And
nearly all the places we went to, they worried about this big flood of money coming in and the lack of accountability.
Concerns grow over foreign aid in the Pacific. But first, phone lines are down in Vanuatu following a 7.3 magnitude quake 30 kilometres west of Vanuatu's capital, Port Vila. However, the few videos and photos seen by RNZ out of Port Vila posted to social media show extensive damage, including a collapsed building. Meanwhile, the US Tsunami National Warning Centre says the tsunami threat has now passed. We'll have more on this. For the latest updates, head over to our website at rnz.co.nz/Pacific. The only airline that had been servicing Mendi in the Southern Highlands in Papua New Guinea since it reopened earlier this year is maintaining a suspension of services that began last month. PNG Air was not prepared to fly in while it had security concerns about the airport. The company says they've been unable to clarify the extent of the security risk. It says the recent departure of senior National Airport Corporation staff is also a concern. Local broadcaster NBC reports PNG Air saying it made the decision in the best interest of customer safety. Mendi Airport has long been a problem for air services providers, and Don Wiseman asked our PNG correspondent Scott Whitey what the problems are.
2018 was, I guess, the biggest clash that happened. There was a lot of things that happened, and the most prominent thing was the burning of the Link PNG plane. It's a Air New Guinea plane. Now, that prompted airlines, both airlines, Air New Guinea and PNG Air, to suspend flights to Mendi indefinitely, and that forced people to actually use the road whenever they wanted to come to Lae or other centres. As I understand it, there are pockets of clashes that exist in Mendi, in and around Mendi and in the Southern Highlands. That's been cause for concern for both police and businesses, and that's been happening for a long time. In 2022, during the elections, there was another series of clashes, and that was triggered by the elections, and that continued for some time until January of this year.
So we had this suspension with the airlines pulling out, but the airfield itself was unusable, wasn't it, because of the damage that had been done, and then a refurbishment program started.
Yes, there was a reopening event that saw a lot of politicians and local leaders come together and then welcome the first flight that returned after 7 years, nearly 7 years. But that hasn't put an end to the security concerns.
So PNG Air came back, but Air New Guinea has said, well, we'll wait, thanks.
Yeah, Air New Guinea is unlikely to return in the near future. I mean, it was a huge blow for them to have one of their planes burnt, and it's never really happened in Papua New Guinea. We've seen small third-level airline planes being burnt and destroyed, but not so much Air New Guinea. So that was a huge blow for them in terms of costs and in terms of security concerns.
So PNG Air started flying back in, but then they suspended last month, and they're saying now that they'll be out for the foreseeable future while they wait just to get some sort of a reassurance that the place is actually secure. But who's going to be doing the securing?
It's a huge concern for the airlines to see, especially with news they're seeing on social media and from the messages that they get. The governor for Southern Highlands, William Powie, has released a statement saying that this is an isolated incident and that it's being dealt with, and the airfield is not being touched by Klansmen who are involved in the conflict, but that is just not enough of a guarantee for an airline who's investing money and trying to provide a service into Mendi.
So for the people of Mendi in Southern Highlands, how far do they have to go to catch a plane?
The nearest airport would be Kagamuga in Mount Hagen, so it's a few hours drive down from Mendi to Kagamuga, and Kagamuga's very busy airport. It's notorious for delays, so the only other option is to travel by road from Mendi all the way to either Lei or Baroka.
And we're talking hours and hours.
Yes, at least 9 hours.
A highly successful immunisation program for pregnant Māori and Pasifika mamas and their babies in South Auckland had its funding cut earlier this year, even as warnings sounded off of the looming whooping cough epidemic. Officials declared the epidemic just over 3 weeks ago as cases spiked to levels not seen since 2018. Ruth Hill reports.
The county's Manukau maternal and immunisation program vaccinated 2,500 hapu mama against whooping cough in 2 years to the end of April, helping to nearly double coverage for local Māori mums-to-be from 17.5% to 36%. New Life Midwives was one group offering immunisations. Papatoetoe midwife Judith Johnston Nuelua says vaccination against whooping cough in pregnancy is the best protection for vulnerable newborns, the most at risk from the deadly infection.
New Life Midwives was head and shoulders above anywhere else in the country for vaccination and pregnancy. They were pretty amazed with what we were able to achieve. We were talking about at least 100 or more women a month.
Data seen by RNZ shows in the last 10 months of the program, the team gave nearly 5,000 vaccinations of all kinds to those who were pregnant and their whānau, including 775 kids under 5, mostly Māori and Pasifika. Fellow new midwife Linda Burke says the secret to their success is no secret.
Pacific women, a lot of them don't drive, so they would have to wait for their husbands to come home from work to bring them. And the vaccinator that we had, who was an ex-midwife, she would stay behind so that those babies or mothers would be captured. And that was our success of taking the service to people.
But most of this work stopped abruptly at the end of June, when money from the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund ran out. Health New Zealand knocked back a bid for just over $560,000 a year to keep the program going. A limited service continues at 3 sites, including New Life, with public health nurses holding 2 clinics a week, which close at 2 p.m. Judith Johnston Nuelua says that doesn't work for most families, and she reckons Te Whatu Ora's whooping cough awareness campaign also misses the mark.
Advertising the fact that people need to go get vaccinations from where? From an already overstretched primary health service. That they're not going to sit around sick people. Why would you have hapu mama sit around sick people to wait for vaccination? It makes no sense at all.
Last year's immunisation task force made 54 recommendations to fix what it called the dire state of childhood immunisation. A new plan calls for at-risk children to be targeted, plus growing the pool of vaccinators. However, the task force's chair, leading Māori paediatrician Owen Sinclair, says while the government says immunisation is a priority, it's not actually investing in services.
What they are doing is cutting, slashing the budgets for everyone, and then sort of stepping back and saying you've got to square your books. And so people have no choice but to cut services. They have got no choice. They have to do it.
Health New Zealand says it's working at pace with Hauora Māori and Pacific providers to restart services in Pukekohe, Mangere and Otara next year, and trialling after-hours services in 2 places. It says there's been additional national funding this year to increase immunisation in general practice, pharmacies and through Plunkett and Hauora Māori and Pacific providers.
A new report has found citizens of Pacific Island nations are concerned about accountability and transparency around increased foreign aid and development projects as a result of strategic competition in the region. The Lowy Institute report is called Looking Through a Pacific Islands Lens, Access, Accountability and Alignment in Global Engagements. It's based on extensive field research in 7 Pacific countries, talking with more than 150 Pacific leaders and stakeholders across government, civil society and business. Koroi Hawkins spoke with the co-authors of the study, Meg Keane and Mihai Sora, and began by asking report lead Dr. Keane why they embarked on the survey.
So, Cora, the reason we did this is, I think, as you would know in the news, we hear a lot about the perpetual competition, the contest, the desire for the traditional partners to maintain their primary position. But we really wanted to hear more from Pacific Island countries about how they were experiencing the geopolitical contest and the increasing external engagement. We do hear a little bit from the leaders, particularly at things like the Pacific Island Forum, but we don't often hear from government officials and NGOs, community members. So this was a report that surveyed over 150 people across 7 countries and really just explored how the leaders from all different walks of life, politicians, but government officials and locals were experiencing geopolitical competition.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Koroi, as we often hear throughout the Pacific, it's felt that there's sometimes a disconnection between the political decision makers and senior officials in government or members of civil society or even the communities at large. Oftentimes we hear about this tension between how national interest is perceived in communities and how national interest decisions are taken by the political class. So this project was really about investigating where there may be those discrepancies. As Meg said, there's been a lot of high-level leaders to leader contact from traditional partners, from new partners. But we really wanted to know, where does that leave everybody else in the country? And are those decisions flowing through in a coherent or consistent way that is contributing to development outcomes or economic outcomes or security outcomes in the way that they're often touted in media announcements and so forth?
Something that stood out for me, and to have it articulated this way, we're obviously watching and seeing a lot of these trends, but you use the phrase, in some cases, turbocharging corruption, which I thought was really, really interesting. Did you want to start there and maybe go into some of the actual findings of what you heard from people?
So I can just begin. I think that nearly all the places we went to, they worried about this big flood of money coming in and the lack of accountability and visibility of the flows of those funds, and that the central systems were being overwhelmed. As you would be aware, Coral, there can be 6 people that are trying to deal with dozens of donors, multilateral and bilateral, trying to engage. And what's happening is there's a leapfrogging of those central systems in some cases, and this was brought up as a big concern, where instead of going through the centralized processes, people are creating parallel processes. They're going to line agencies. They're going down to localities, traditional chiefs, and those areas aren't always well placed to drive the best deal. So we have the problem of money going in different places, not being accountable, and central systems being leapfrogged. And this was, I guess, the major concerns that people were raising.
And I think another element is that where you do have a large contribution, for example, to budget support, or where you have an external development partner essentially filling a gap, either in infrastructure or even health and education, sometimes we heard the view that, this took some of the pressure off national political figures to deliver in those sectors to the same degree. So particularly in countries where you have a large component of constituency development funds, for example. So there was this view articulated that, where an external partner is essentially leading or filling a gap in a core development or social policy area, that meant, because of the fungibility of money, it meant that leaders were able to use their discretionary funds in a way that was more politically calculated or in a way that benefited their own personal, political, or familial networks. So this sort of sense that, they're off the hook in a way as a result of this surge or this perceived, large influx of money and projects as well.
And the other thing that I thought was really interesting working with the community groups is a perception that because a lot of these finances and relationships is designed to deepen influence or to create influence, there's less finances going through to local communities, and the civic space is shrinking. And because of that, it's harder for the NGOs, the community groups, to hold the government to account because they don't have as much visibility of what's going on, and they don't have as much support as they have in the past to do that accountability. And we heard that from Transparency International, we heard that for women's groups, and we heard that from some of the community groups working on disaster resilience.
Just building on that is we sometimes heard that the stakeholders in Pacific countries are well aware of the diplomatic objective that larger partners have. You know, they're seeking to build influence, as Meg said. So as they see it, they're disincentivized from pressing for accountability, for holding, not that they're not following their own standards, but they're actually disincentivized from checking some of this more politically focused behavior, for example. So, you know, to put it very, very frankly, donors are not inclined to expose, you know, the politicization of their activities or the political allocation of resources or the delivery of the projects. If they're also trying to build influence with these very same people, they also don't want to, you know, scrutinize their actions and do anything that actually diminishes from that diplomatic objective of winning friends.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā soifua.